He was just a boy when his entire world collapsed. At only 9 years old, he stood by 2 wooden coffins, the last pieces of the only family he'd ever known. No aunts, no uncles, no one to take him in. The neighbors whispered about foster care, about the streets, about a boy with no future. But before the system could claim him, a man appeared, offering shelter on a remote farm, far from the city's noise. But that offer came with a price. The man didn't see a child, he saw an extra pair of hands. Days turned into endless chores, mending fences, feeding animals, cleaning tools, while other kids his age played or studied. He was too young to fight back, too scared to run. And yet, in the quiet of those long nights, the boy whispered to himself that he would find a way out. Someday, somehow, he'd be more than this. And he kept that promise. Years later, he'd walk into a towering glass building as one of the youngest directors in a leading tech company. He had money, respect, and a name people admired. But when his phone rang one evening and a familiar name appeared on the screen, his heart froze. The man from the farm was back, sick, desperate, and asking for help. The boy's name was Ethan. After the funeral, he sat on the edge of a creaky wooden bench, clutching the small backpack that held everything he owned, an old shirt, a pair of shoes 2 sizes too big, and a photo of his parents. He didn't cry anymore. He had no tears left. When the man approached, wearing a wide-brimmed hat and dusty boots, Ethan wanted to believe he was safe. "You can stay with me," the man said, "but you'll have to earn your keep." Ethan nodded. What other choice did he have? The farm was miles away from the nearest town, a place where the world seemed to forget people existed. His new home was a narrow room above the barn that smelled of hay and mold. Every morning before sunrise, the man banged on his door, barking orders like a drill sergeant. Fix the fence, feed the cattle, clean the stalls. Ethan's hands blistered, his back ached, but he said nothing. He had learned that complaining didn't change anything. It only made things worse. School became an afterthought. The man allowed him to attend, but only if every chore was finished first. Most days, Ethan arrived late, smelling like the barn, his clothes stained and his head heavy from exhaustion. Teachers scolded him for dozing off in class. Classmates avoided him, whispering about the farm boy who never spoke. He buried himself in books when he could, but time to study was rare. Still, deep inside, he refused to let his dreams die, even if he couldn't tell anyone what they were. Some nights, lying in his tiny bed, Ethan imagined a different life. He pictured tall buildings, shiny floors, and a suit that actually fit. He imagined being respected, wanted, free. But every time he drifted off into those dreams, the man's voice dragged him back to reality. "You're lucky I took you in, boy. Don't forget it." Those words cut deeper than any whip. And for years, Ethan believed them, until the day came when he couldn't anymore. Ethan was 13 the night he finally decided he couldn't take it anymore. The farm was silent, the man snoring in his chair by the fireplace after too much whiskey. Ethan packed his few belongings, a worn-out notebook, his parents' photo, and a torn jacket, and slipped out the door. The gravel crunched under his shoes as he ran into the dark, his breath sharp and quick. For the first time in years, he felt both fear and freedom, and he didn't stop running until the farm was just a shadow in the distance. He found his way to a city shelter, a place that smelled of disinfectant and carried the quiet hum of desperation. It wasn't much, but it was safe. There, volunteers offered him meals, clean clothes, and, most importantly, a chance to go back to school. It felt strange to be cared for by people who wanted nothing in return. For the first time since his parents died, Ethan didn't feel like a burden. He was still broken, but now he had space to start putting himself back together. School became his sanctuary. Ethan was behind in almost every subject, but he refused to let that define him. He stayed late asked questions, and spent nights poring over books under the flickering light of the shelter's common room. A counselor at the shelter noticed his determination and took him under her wing, teaching him study skills and guiding him through the chaos of teenage life. "You're smarter than you think," she told him. For Ethan, those words became a lifeline. By 16, he was thriving. He earned scholarships for his grades, worked part-time jobs to save money, and devoured every piece of knowledge he could find about technology. Computers fascinated him. Machines that, unlike people, always did what they promised. He dreamed of building something bigger than himself, of proving to the world, and maybe to the man who once owned his time, that he was worth far more than hard labor on a forgotten farm. At 18, Ethan's hard work paid off when he was accepted into a competitive internship program at a major tech company. He walked into the towering glass building wearing a borrowed suit that didn't quite fit, feeling like an imposter. But the same determination that carried him out of the farm now pushed him through every challenge. He stayed late, asked questions no one else dared to, and learned every corner of the business. In an industry that devoured the unprepared, Ethan was unstoppable. His supervisors quickly noticed his drive. Within a year, he wasn't just another intern, he was leading small projects and mentoring new hires. He combined raw intelligence with the resilience forged from his past, tackling problems others gave up on. When doors seemed closed, he found windows. When projects failed, he turned them into lessons. The boy who once mended fences in silence now built digital bridges for one of the fastest-growing companies in the country. By 25, Ethan was managing an entire department. He earned respect not just for his results, but for the quiet strength behind them. He didn't crave recognition, he craved progress. Every late-night coding, every negotiation he mastered, every problem he solved was proof that he'd become more than the life that tried to keep him small. He learned to navigate boardrooms as easily as he once navigated the creaky barn floors of his childhood. At 28, he achieved what few could even dream of, a director's seat. From his corner office overlooking the city skyline, Ethan often thought about how far he'd come. The kid who used to sleep above a barn now made decisions that shaped the future of an entire company. But even at his peak, the past had a way of creeping back, and one phone call would soon remind him that no amount of success could erase where he came from. It was late on a Thursday evening when Ethan's assistant knocked on his office door. "There's someone who needs to speak with you. It's personal," she said, hesitating. She handed him a letter, handwritten, shaky, almost desperate. As his eyes scanned the words, his heart dropped. The name signed at the bottom was one he hadn't spoken in over a decade. The man who once gave him shelter, who worked him like a machine, was reaching out, and he was dying. The letter was simple, almost too simple. The man was sick, cancer, advanced and cruel. He couldn't afford treatment and had no one else to turn to. "You're the closest thing I have to family," the letter read. The words made Ethan's hands tremble. Family? The same man who told him he was lucky to even have a roof? The man who turned his childhood into a prison now wanted saving. For days, Ethan couldn't focus. He'd stare out of his office window, the city lights blurring into nothing as his mind replayed the years on the farm, the blisters on his hands, the hunger, the exhaustion, the sting of being treated as less than human. 1,000 times he imagined this moment, what he'd say if he ever saw the man again. But now that it was real, the anger and pain felt heavier than any words could carry. The next morning, a social worker called, confirming what the letter said. The man had listed Ethan as his emergency contact, his next of kin. Ethan didn't know whether to laugh or scream. He wasn't family. He was a survivor of that man's cruelty. And yet, here he was, being asked to save the very person who once made him feel worthless. The irony was suffocating, and deep down, he knew this decision would change him forever. That night, Ethan couldn't sleep. He sat in his apartment, city lights flickering through the massive windows as memories he thought he'd buried came flooding back. The man's voice echoed in his head, the sharp commands, the dismissive tone, the words that made him feel small. Every scar from those years seemed to reopen at once. Part of him wanted to throw the letter away, to let the past finally die. Why should he help someone who never helped him? But anger never silenced the other voice inside him, the one that whispered when he was a boy on that farm, dreaming of something better. He remembered the few rare moments when the man wasn't cruel, like when he left a plate of food by Ethan's door on a freezing night, or patched up a cut on his hand after a long day's work. They weren't acts of kindness so much as survival, but they were still something. And sometimes, even the smallest acts linger. The next day, Ethan called an old friend, one of the few who knew his full story. They sat in a quiet cafe as Ethan poured out the conflict tearing him apart. "If I help him, does it mean what he did was okay?" Ethan asked, voice breaking. His friend shook his head. "No. It means you're stronger than what he did to you. Helping him won't erase the past, but it might free you from it." The words sank deep, shifting something inside him. That night, Ethan made his decision. He didn't do it for the man. He didn't do it for closure or even forgiveness. He did it for the boy who once dreamed of being more than his pain. He called the social worker, arranged for the treatment to be fully covered, and requested anonymity. The man would never know who saved his life. And Ethan preferred it that way. Because this wasn't about gratitude. This was about becoming the person he always wished someone had been for him. Weeks later, the social worker confirmed that the treatment had begun. Ethan never visited, never called, never signed his name. He remained a ghost in the story, quietly watching from the sidelines. One afternoon, he parked outside the small clinic where the man was staying. Through the window, he saw him, frailer than he remembered, humbled by sickness, no longer the towering figure who once controlled his life. Ethan didn't go in. He just stood there, taking in the scene, letting the past and present collide in silence. As he walked away, Ethan felt something he hadn't expected. Not joy, not closure, but peace. He hadn't helped the man to fix what was broken between them. He had helped because he refused to let his pain turn into hatred. He had become the person his younger self once prayed for, a man capable of compassion when cruelty would have been easier. And as he returned to his car, he realized that this act of grace wasn't for the man at all. It was for himself. Ethan's story reminds us that true strength isn't about revenge. It's about choosing who you become, even when the world has been cruel to you. He turned his pain into purpose, proving that compassion can rewrite even the darkest chapters of our lives. And if this story moved you, don't miss our last video, Left Behind as a Boy. But years later, he became their only hope. Another unforgettable journey of resilience and redemption you need to see next.